Welcome back to the Philly Film Room podcast. Along with my co-host Eric Sidewater, I am Nick Waters, and today we're switching to the offensive side of the ball, and we're going to be talking about running backs. And this is a position group that I know everyone is excited for now that we've added Saquon Barkley to the mix. And Howie Roseman really went out and shocked the world and spent big money at the position, but I think for good reason. So we'll talk about Saquon. We're going to talk about Shipley and Gainwell. We'll throw in a little Kendall Milton in there. And of course, we're going to touch on how Kellen Moore likes to use his running backs. But first up, let's talk about the strengths of this unit. Eric, what do you think is the strength of this running back room?
Yeah, to me, it's the fact that they finally have a well-rounded back. Repeatedly over the past several years, it was obvious what the Eagles were trying to do, like pass run-wise, depending on which running back they actually brought in the game. DeAndre Swift really couldn't pass block at all. So if they're bringing him in on third down, they're pretty much just putting him out in a route. And then if they had Gainwell in on early downs, they weren't going to run like inside zone from shotgun very often with him. So you kind of tipped their hand that they were going to pass often and use him as a pass blocker. Now with Saquon, he can do everything. He can run inside, outside, he can catch the ball, and he can pass protect. And that makes them just much more unpredictable on any given down and distance when he's in the game. And I don't trivialize how much of a difference that is. One of the main criticisms levied against the Eagles offense by anyone is how predictable they were. And it kind of came to a head with the 49ers saying we put out the blueprint on how to stop them. And it all went downhill from there. So having someone well-rounded, to me, that's a clear strength, as well as a guy who you can just lean on for big volume. If it turns out that you're going against a team who's just struggling to stop the run, especially with how much better the Eagles' offensive line was than the Giants, well, you can just punish them the entire game. That's not really something they could do. Last year, they often had terrible turnovers that turned the tide of the game even when they were leading. One of the skills of game management is being able to play with the lead, to some extent bleed the clock, but if you're just running for 1 yard and a cloud of dust, that's not getting the job done. I view that as a clear strength. So how about for you?
Yeah, you make a number of good points. Number one, not tipping your hand. Just something that was hard not to do last year listen, Swift was just not a good pass blocker, and it became an issue for them. And with the way coordinators are, how smart they are, if you have a good receiving back that can't pass block, you know what they're going to do? They're going to manipulate or send pressures in a way that forces your running back to stay in, so you can't get them out on a route, and then force them to block. And they might do that by sending a linebacker up the middle and then dropping an edge so that they keep 7 in coverage. There's different ways to do it, but defense coordinators know how to take advantage of the weaknesses of your running back, especially if that running back is a receiving threat like Swift was. You also made a point about just bleeding the game out, having a closer. They didn't really have that last year. Swift's a lot of fun, but I think he is more of a rotation back. He's not a closer. He's not a guy that's getting a lot of yards after contact. He's not a power back. And guess what? When you get to your 4-minute offense, defenses are going to be loading up the box. They're going to get free hitters. They're going to have an extra guy for whatever you're trying to do. And you need someone that's going to be able to run through contact. And Swift's numbers running through contact were not very good last year. And that's kind of been who he is as a player throughout his career, is more of a shifty back than he is, a lower his pads and run through you kind of guy. But Saquon's opposite of that. He is a guy that, with his size being over 230 pounds and his strength, we've all seen his crazy workout videos. This is a guy that can really help this team close out games, and it's a huge, huge benefit for them now. Now, here's the thing. Saquon, to me, the strengths of this unit, it all comes down to Saquon, and I think that part of that is because of how good I think Saquon is, but I think part of it is the pieces behind him. This isn't a team like the Dolphins who have a good 1-2 punch and maybe a 1-2-3 punch now that they added Jalen Wright, but having an A-Chain and a Mostert that you can throw out there. The Eagles don't have that guy that can kind of fill in after that. So while I think the strength is having a guy like Saquon that can do it all, be a essentially like a three-tool player at running back where he can good runner, good receiver, good pass blocker. They they're a little bit thin behind him. So if he were to get hurt, this team could be in a precarious position. So, I'm kind of jumping to the weaknesses right here, but there's not a ton of depth behind him that you're really confident about. If he ends up getting hurt for the long term this year, knock on wood, this may be a situation where we're trying to hit the trade market to see if we can bring someone in, or this might be something where we're really using a big rotation. So, listen, I think Gainwell gets a lot more hate than he probably should because I think expectations kind of got out of control a little bit. When you go back and look at last year, there was a lot of people saying he might be the RB1, and if you go into the season with the expectations Gainwell's a RB1, well, you're going to be let down. And then what ends up happening is when you get let down, you tend to over exaggerate some of those feelings and you look at the negatives and overlook some of the good things he did. Listen, he's not a super dynamic player, but there's a reason why the coaches like him. He's not going to, he's not going to get you a ton of negatives because he's trying to hit home runs. Like Swift would put him in a lot of bad positions down the stretch at the end of games because he wasn't comfortable or he wasn't content trying to just stick his nose behind the guard and just run and get the 2 yards that are available. A lot of times he would end up trying to bounce outside, and then we end up like the Bills game. We end up losing 4 yards on a play when we're trying to go down and score. Now we're in 3rd and 14. Luckily, they got out of it by throwing a crazy play to Zacchaeus, and he bailed us out on 3rd and 14. But you don't really get that with Gainwell. He's not going to hit a ton of home runs, but he's going to kind of do what you're asking him to do. Now, that's not going to win you a ton of games, but it's not necessarily going to lose you a ton of games. I think Shipley's kind of a similar player in that he's more of a he's going to do his job. I don't think if you look at his numbers compared to running backs coming out of college, his metrics aren't super great. His yards after contact, his missed tackles forced, they're all in like the bottom 20th percentile of the top running of all the running backs that were drafted in the past 5 years. So you lose Saquon, or if you need to give him a breather, I don't know if it's a pretty thin position after him. So I'm a little worried about that, and just knowing Saquon's history and just how the running back position is overall, I do get a little bit worried about that. What about you, Eric?
I agree totally. You took the words out of my mouth. They don't have a dynamic change of pace back. I think specifically of Keaton Mitchell in Baltimore before he had that freak leg injury, Tajay Spears. These are guys who can catch it too. It's kind of like the thunder and lightning, a lot of bursts to him, and Achan, who I was just in love with him coming out of college. So not having a player like that, it is a luxury. One of the great things about having a player like that, not only are they good to give your bell cow a breather, and they're still effective, but you can also put them on the field at the same time. And that 21 personnel, 2 running backs on the field at the same time, if you look at the advanced stats, can be a really potent personnel package. It's a very symmetrical formations. You can run either direction, you can throw either direction, you can max protect. So if you do have 2 good backs and a good offense coordinator, it can be quite a potent personnel package. I don't really envision that this year. Not only are none of the backups, like I said, that dynamic, but I don't think they pair that well with Barkley either. Specifically, talking about Gainwell, I did like him a lot coming out, and I thought, especially probably like in the first year and in the second, he showed some juice. For whatever reason, I thought he lost a little bit of it last year. Who knows if he had some ticky-tack injuries or what it may be. Just now he has more miles on his tires. But yeah, he didn't have quite the same juice. I still think he's a serviceable back who should make the team. Now, in terms of Shipley, it's a shame because he's more of a speed back. who's, he's not a bulky guy, but he's not that elusive. And I said this back when we did our specific draft coverage, which was he runs exactly like a lacrosse player runs. So, and his jukes, when you're playing lacrosse, you can use your head fakes and the stick to juke out people. His jukes look exactly like that when he's running in the open field, and they do not work. Now, the funny thing is, he has extremely good, what I like to call turn of foot. So, if you're just changing directions, but it's not a hard cut, and you're not doing a jump cut or anything like this, he's really good at that. One guy you could think about is Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill, he's not a guy, he's hardly ever juking people like this with wiggle, but he's just changing direction subtly, almost in a rounded fashion, but he just beats people into whatever direction he wants to go. Obviously, Shipley is not even close to that level of explosiveness or top end speed, but that's how he can get around people. The other problem is he goes down on first contact extremely easily. It's like he's not physical enough to break arm tackles, and he's not wiggly enough to completely avoid hits in the open field. But he does have good vision. So if they give him a huge hole, he has pretty much like 4.3 and change speed. He's a true 4.4 player. He'll eat up yards. And I think he's smart enough as a runner, as when he does get an open hole, he's not like Saquon where he's gonna immediately start to like seek out contact or potentially even juke into the defense. He'll just try to run away from people, which is nice. And then I don't know if I'm jumping the gun to get into Milton, but the thing I love about Milton is if he's in the open field with the head of steam and there's a defensive back there, watch out, choo choo, because the train is coming through. It was comical how defensive backs would just fly off this guy. It also made it a little bit of a strange thing because if a linebacker or lineman ever got their hands on him, he kind of just went down right away. And I don't necessarily think it was like, oh, he can destroy guys who are 190, but guys who are 230 own him physically. It was more just a question of momentum. When you get touched by guys who are closer to the line of scrimmage, such as linemen and linebackers, you're not going to have that built up speed as often as you are when you're 8 to 10 yards down the field against defensive backs. And Georgia, they ran a lot of shotgun inside zones, and it can be hard to build up a lot of momentum in that kind of run scheme. Whereas Kellen Moore, yeah, he will run stuff like that, but he will run a fair bit of under center runs, especially wide zones. And in those kind of runs, you can get 10 yards of built up speed before there's any contact. I thought his vision was solid, and he's pretty elusive for the amount of power he brings. And, he didn't really show much reps catching it, but it looks like, he doesn't have rock for hands, I don't think. And then he projects to be probably pretty solid as a pass protector with his physicality. And in the limited reps of pass protection I watched, he looked good. From what I heard anecdotally, when he first came in to Georgia, he was bad in pass protection, which I think any high school running back in the nation that's probably true for, except like Leonard Fournette or something. But he improved considerably every year after that. So, Milton is something guy I have my eye on because we mentioned it before. They don't have a dynamic change of pace back, but to me, he brings a little more juice to the equation. And so I'll be interested to see if is he someone they carry on the practice squad or is he a surprise guy who makes the 53?
Yeah, so I'll jump back to Shipley real quick. If he's a guy that's having to make guys miss in the hole or within about 5 yards from the line of scrimmage or beyond, I don't think that's necessarily his strength. When he gets into the open field, I think he's got a little bit, some moves that he can win with. but it's a little weird his style. Like I think his vision is really good as a runner, and I think that's how he's going to stick around in the league. I do think he needs to add some play strength a little bit, not only to help as a runner, but really as a pass blocker. I think that's what's going to hold him back the most from getting on the field early is his pass blocking and also some of his fumble issues. Um, but it's a little interesting because he's a guy that if you watch a lot of running backs coming out of college, what ends up happening a lot is the inside gets clogged up and then they bounce runs outside and then will race guys to the edge. Like Jameer Gibbs was the master at this coming out of Alabama. Shipley's a guy that he doesn't have Jameer Gibbs speed or burst, but he has enough burst and enough wiggle where he's a guy that I thought would bounce runs a little bit more, but he was really good at flowing with the offensive line, and I'm gonna come out with a episode pretty soon to kind of compare and contrast him and Gainwell as they battle for the RB2 job. But I thought he was more of an inside runner. Like he would try and get back inside instead of try and bounce these runs outside and try and make that extra free hit or miss, which is kind of is a little opposite of how he is as a physical runner. His physicality isn't the greatest in the world, but he's really good at navigating and slithering inside and finding space. So it's interesting to see that dynamic. I do think he's a guy that you want to see add some strength as his career progresses. But like you said, Milton is going to bring a different dynamic and from Gainwell and Shipley. Obviously, much more of a power back. Once he gets downhill, I mean, he's a hard dude to bring down. So, like you mentioned with the Derrick Henry comparison, Derrick Henry is very similar in that they run a lot of outside zone, where I thought he was best at outside zone. When a lot of people think that's something that a speed back is going to be really good at, which a lot of times they are, but you're going to get a lot of these plays on inside zone runs where you're having to kind of stop your feet and wind the ball all the way to the back, all the way back. Whereas a lot of times on outside zone runs, you're getting the defense to flow hard to the sideline, and then you can kind of stick your foot in the ground and then get upfield. You're not having to make guys miss as much on the backfield. I think that is kind of a little bit of Milton's downfall is if you get his feet stopped on the backfield, he's not a guy that's going to make a ton of people miss behind the line of scrimmage. So you could trap him in on those plays. But once he does get downhill and has a hole, I mean, people are going to be feeling that the next day. So, he brings that to the table. I do think he's a bit upright as a runner, and I do think he's a little stiff. He also doesn't have a ton of long speed. So when he does get to the open field, he's not going to be breaking a ton of, 50-yard runs. He's going to be, more of these shorter chunk gains that you can kind of get. So we'll see how that plays out. But the thing that I wonder is what happens if Barkley goes down? Who is going to step up, or how does this work? Do you have any ideas of how this rotation might play out, or what the Eagles might do if Barkley were to get injured for a significant amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the running back by committee approach. I think just the level of comfort they have with Gainwell would lead him to getting the highest snap share. That said, if you're looking for the best Barkley analog, it's by far Milton. Um, so it'll just be interesting to see how that materializes. You as with any training camp, you hope it's a meritocracy. If it comes out there and they're like, "Holy crap, this guy Milton is a monster," and it's like, "Oh, Shipley he gets sneezed on and he goes down." Well, who knows? I mean, can he overcome the fact that Shipley was a fourth rounder and he was a UDFA? Perhaps. But if Barkley goes down, presumably they'll have 3 running backs active on game days. So it will just be those 3 guys, and I bet the split would be like 40% Gainwell, 30% Shipley, and 30% Milton. Just because if you're looking at like under center or short yardage runs or red zone, I mean, Milton seems like by far the best option to me, and so that's why he could eat into that snap count. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's going to kind of be, I mean, it will for sure be a committee approach. It's not going to be, none of these guys are going to come in and then take, Saquon 70 to 75% of the snaps he's likely to get. I do want to jump back real quick. You know, you talking about hoping at some meritocracy in camp. Milton's play style, it probably isn't going to be a guy that really stands out in camp because in camp you can't really be physical. He's going to have to stand out in the preseason games when you can actually tackle people. Uh, a lot of times this is very similar with linebackers too. It's kind of hard to tell, you know, who are the guys at those positions because a lot of it comes down to the physicality, to the tackling, to the getting the guys on the ground part, and you just don't see that a lot in training camp. So I hope he doesn't become a victim of how camp is, where some of those dynamic, jitterbugs are get all the attention because they can make these highlight plays right now, and that's not what Milton's going to excel at. You're not going to see him out in open space just putting on all these moves. He's a guy that is going to run through someone. So I don't know how it's going to go if I mean I don't know the breakdown, the split. I mean I assume Kenny Gainwell will probably have more carries than anyone else at if Saquon were to go down, but it's going to be a committee approach. I think they're going to play specific roles um, at that point in time, and I wouldn't be surprised if they go and bring someone in or try and make a move for someone at that point in time. Thinking of guys they might be able to go out and get. I've heard rumors that Khalil Herbert might be on the block if they want to go out and get someone like that to add to this group. If you look at who's available in free agency, it's like, well, I think I'll just stick with who we got. Um, at that point in time, I think it's guys like Damian Harris. I think Josh Kelly, who was with the Chargers last year. Watching that Chargers tape last year, man, that stuff was tough. I didn't think those running backs were very good as runners, especially with Eckler being hurt for a lot of the year, dealing with the sprained ankle. Um, some of the Jerick McKinnon's out there, but he's like a 32-year-old back. He lost a lot of playing time last year. I just free agency market's looking a little thin. If someone were to get hurt, it might turn into something where you got to kind of go out and make a trade. But Sirianni loves Gainwell. He's like a coach's player. He's gonna do what you ask of him. So I think Gainwell will probably end up taking the lion's share of the split at that point in time. So we'll have to see. Do you we were talking about this a little bit earlier in terms of snap share. How much of the snaps do you think Saquon will get when fully healthy? Do you think he's because I have some concerns. Like I personally hope they don't run this guy into the ground because we're a team that should be in the playoffs. I want him to be fresh in the playoffs. So where are you looking at snap share for Saquon? Did you have any idea or look at any of those kind of numbers?
75, yeah,
Yeah.
75%. Which I don't think all carries are created equally in terms of mileage. Or not carries, but just snaps. You know, there may be times where he's out there as a decoy. There may be times where he's out there running swing routes. Those aren't gonna do a toll on you. But if you're running up the gut 250 times, yeah, that will take a lot out of you. So, I think it's just gonna be more about, and it's not only how often you're on the field and how often you're running, but it's even the frequency. Like if they're just leaning on you for an entire drive to run all the way down the field, that's going to take a lot more out of you than it would if those same carries were spread across 2 quarters, for example. So to me, it's just going to, the way it materializes is ultimately going to dictate how much fatigue and wear and tear it shows up over the course of the season. Now, maybe we differ a little bit because if you look at the contract structure, it's pretty much a 2-year deal and then they're done. And to me, that would say the writing's on the wall that they're gonna just run this guy straight into the ground after and get the best out of him for 2 years. Now, I think there is a little bit of nuance there, and you've alluded to it, which is, yeah, you could have a ton of snaps and carries for the guy, but can you do it in a way where you can still get a lot out of him in the playoffs? I think those are both possible. So you just hope that they can manage that. Now, here's the trick with it. If you're in a bunch of barn burners, you're not going to be able to manage snaps. You're just going to put your best guys out on the field. Now, I went through the schedule and, maybe I'm being overzealous, but I thought there were 7 wins where if we play somewhat decent, we should just get the victory. And it's like, okay, in those games, can you limit his carries to 10 to 15, get the other guys on the field, and then hopefully you secure a playoff spot early, and then you have 95% Saquon in the playoffs. I definitely think that's important. But you can't guarantee it going into the season.
Yeah, it's well. I'll touch on like using him in high leverage situations. Like I think drive starters is he should start the vast majority of the drives because you don't, even though you're further from the end zone, you don't want to go 3 and out. 3 and outs hurt your defense. They don't give them a time to rest. It hurts your field position. You at least want to get one first down, even if your drive isn't successful. You at least want to get one first down. So I think he needs to be a guy that is a drive starter in the majority of drives. But can we save him some snaps between the 40s and then get him back on the field? In those high leverage situations where it's either third downs or once you get closer to the red zone. And when you get closer to the red zone, the teams that are generally best in the red zone are teams that can run the ball because the field gets condensed. Passing becomes a lot harder, and a lot of times you got to rely on your run game to pound it in and finish out those drives. Saquon's the best guy to do that on this team. So hopefully we can save some of those snaps for high leverage situations. And like you said, maybe use them as decoys on some of those other plays, like if he does need to get on the field in those barn burners. And we're looking at, between the 40s when teams start to take some of their shot plays. Can we just put him in situations where he's not having to expend too much energy or take too much hits? I agree with you, though. I think about 70 to 75% of the snaps is probably where he's going to end up. If you look at Saquon's career, 2023, he played 65% of the snaps. 2022, 75%. 2021, I didn't include because he had a pretty bad ankle injury that bothered him the whole year. 2020, he tore his ACL. 2019, he played 68% of the snaps. In 2018, he played 83% of the snaps. So my guess is he's probably going to be in the 70-75% range. I'd hope he doesn't end up in a situation like you said with the contract. They could very well run him into the dirt, and I'd understand why, because he probably is going to be here for 2 years. But I do want him to be fresh for the end of the season. If he ends up with over 300 carries, and we're not even talking receptions, if he ends up over 300 carries in the regular season, I will be a little bit upset because this is a team that should be in the playoffs. Now, if we're like last year and it's every game is a close game, even against the bad teams, then all right, listen, I understand we get to that point in time, but we got to be smart with this guy, and especially with his injury history, and he's played taken a lot of carries over the past few years. That stuff starts to add up. You can look at the history of players over time when they start to get close to those 300 carries per season, especially multiple years in a row. What happens to their bodies and their numbers after that point in time? Now, Saquon's a different animal. He's much bigger and he's a tremendous athlete. So hopefully he's one of those guys, one of those outliers that can kind of outlast some of that. But I'll give you one example of a play where you could kind of see where the wear and tear of the season built up on him. If you go back to the Giants playoff game that we had against them in 2022, there was a play wide open for Saquon. They screwed up the run fits, and it's a play that you would expect him to just take to the house. But he ends up getting caught by Marcus Epps, who is by no means one of the fastest players in the league. And I think some of that had to do with just how much he was being used at that point in time in the year. I think he was just a little bit worn down. I want him to be as fresh as possible assuming we get to the playoffs. But like you said, you never know if we're even going to get there at that point in time. But we'll move on from that, from that conversation, and talk about just a little bit about Kellen Moore and how he likes to use running backs. Was there anything that you noticed or any takeaways that you wanted to discuss on that front?
Yeah, so I've really dug into the Kellen Moore offense over the past week or so. So I am writing a Kellen Moore article right now, which I will post on Twitter. Anyone can access it, and it will kind of go over what Kellen Moore's scheme is really about. In terms of the running backs, in over the last 4 seasons, the teams that Kellen Moore has coached, their running game has not eclipsed what the Eagles did last year. So I wouldn't say it's a run first scheme or any of his run scheming is like savant like, but he does run more under center runs. Now, this is something Eagles fans have been clamoring for the past 2 years. In fact, it culminated last year where the Eagles had the single lowest percentage of snaps from under center in the entire NFL. This is just another feather in the hat to leading them to be a predictable offense. It was below 20%. Now, this is a historically low level. Uh, so the benefit of the under center runs is it's much easier to go either direction. When you're in shotgun, pretty much you're going to go to the middle or to the opposite side that the running back is starting on. Rarely are you going to see the same side toss, although that is a play Kellen Moore runs, and I think it's an awesome play because teams aren't anticipating it. But I really like how he uses the running backs in the pass game. Going back to his Boise State days, he was the quarterback for Boise State. They had a lot of funky formations. One of them was they have essentially four receivers all on one side of the field. You can call it four strong quads. There's a bunch of different names. Often this has the running back aligned very tight to the line, like in a slot formation, like as a slot receiver. And what they would do is they would spam teams on these little flat routes straight away. Like the quarterback would just hike it and throw it straight to the running back in the flat. And then, it's really hard to stop the guy for less than like 3 or 4 yards on plays like that. And then once teams started devoting more resources towards taking away that first read, they had these little wrinkles where they'd have, like the tight ends run little stop routes over the middle, using the running back as a decoy. Now, Saquon, he has enough like name power where he's even better as a decoy. And as I mentioned before, I really like him on some of these quick hitters. He has that burst off the line, and he can convert in like from a catch into a running back very quickly. Some guys, they need 2 or 3 steps before they start to be able to turn upfield. He will use running backs more as checkdowns. Now, it remains to be seen if that will come over to this offense, knowing that Hurts does not like to check down to running backs. I do think Moore is malleable in the sense that he's not going to ask his players to do things that they aren't comfortable with or haven't done in the past. So, although they did that all the time with Austin Eckler and Tony Pollard, it doesn't necessarily mean that will carry over. In terms of the run schemes, one thing I thought that helped them stay fresh, not become predictable and stale, is they'll come out in a variety of formations, often spread looks where it's 4 or 5 wide receivers, and the running back will start out wide, and then they'll motion them into the backfield. That can get you a light box, which you can then run against. That can ID the defense if they're running like a man or zone, and then you can check into a play that you think exploits that. And I think we will definitely see that next year. There was some specific examples from when he was coaching the Cowboys where they would start in a spread formation and then they'd motion into a pistol, which this is essentially where the quarterback is in a mini shotgun with the running back straight behind him. Now, if you talk to the offensive gurus online, they'll say they think pistol might start to gain popularity again in like next season. So we'll see if that prediction comes true. But the cool thing about pistol is it does allow you to have more deep passing concepts than typically under center would, where you're only running like play action shot plays where it's generally about 2 receivers with long developing routes. The cool thing about pistol is you can run either direction. You can run inside, you can throw short, or you can throw long. And this is a formation Kellen Moore looks. The other thing is you can run RPOs and you can run quarterback keepers out of pistol. Even if going back to the Cowboys, even Dak had some nice runs out of some of these looks, and Dak doesn't hold a candle to Hurts in terms of running. This is something maybe that was overlooked a little bit, is that Hurts had way less juice running last year than he did in 22. I thought more so on cuts than it was top end speed, and of course he was dealing with the injury. Um, and if you watch videos of him in OTAs, it looks like he's back, which is highly encouraging. This is, if you have to account for an extra man in the run game, that is a huge advantage. What did you see out of how Kellen Moore likes to use running backs?
Yeah, so here's the thing about Kellen Moore in my eyes. If you go and look at him year to year, he's not a guy that's necessarily going to do the same exact things he did last year. I think he's a guy that a coach that understands that he can and will need to change up some of the stuff that they do based on their team, based on what they're good at and what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. Every team is going to be different every year. Even if you bring back the majority of your players, there's going to be some differences. There's going to be differences in the ways that defenses handle the looks that you were presenting last year, so it might change what you do. I think he's pretty malleable in a lot of the stuff a lot of the stuff he does. So some years you'll see that they're more under center, and then other years they're more around middle of the pack in terms of how often they're under center. So it really varies. So let's look at some numbers. So under center rates, 2019 the Cowboys were 15th. 2021 they were 8th. 2022 they were 6th, and 2023 they were 25th. I think part of this has to do with the type of quarterbacks that he had. Look at 2019. They were 15th in the league in under center rates. That was the year before Dak broke his ankle. After that, Dak became a lot less mobile. They stopped using him as using his legs as much, and then that's why I think they went under center. And then he comes to Los Angeles. Herbert's a good athlete. Even their backup, Easton Stick, is a good athlete. Very similar athletic testing numbers to Jalen Hurts and his size-wise. Listen, he's nowhere near the physical runner he was, but he's a pretty good athlete. But the thing with under center, I know a lot of people are gonna say that I don't think we're gonna be 8th in the league. I don't think we're gonna be in that top 10 in the league in under center, because when you go under center, you lose the numbers advantage that the quarterback gives you in terms of using him and the run game and read option games and different option attacks. So that's why you see like the Ravens have been one of those teams that are very low and under center rates, because you go under center while you're losing that with Lamar Jackson. The Chiefs, and this is more of, in my mind, I think we kind of overstate the importance of under center, because if you go and look at the Chiefs have been bottom 5 and under center rate pretty much since Mahomes has been on the team, and yet they're continually are the best offense. So I think there's more to it than just, are we under center? Are we in shotgun? Execution is the most important thing at the end of the day, and I think that's what the Chiefs have been good at. I'm definitely correct, especially in the NFL, that a lot of times in college, or excuse me, in the NFL, when you're in shotgun, you get kind of predictable when you are in shotgun. Teams don't do what a lot of college teams do and use more same side shotgun runs. I don't know why. The NFL is so slow to adapt to this stuff that it blows my mind going and watching college tape and what offenses are doing in college, and then coming to see it in the NFL is eventually going to trickle in. And you actually see the Chiefs do this a lot. You watch the Chiefs, they come out in shotgun, and they look like they're running inside zone one way, and Pacheco would take like 2 steps towards the opposite side of where he was lined up, and then he immediately is planting his foot to come back the other way. A lot of times nowadays they're keying the running back's path, so they're trying to manipulate the linebackers to influence them to move one direction just to come back the other way. Somewhat like a counter run, but it's just out of shotgun. So a little rant on that, but I don't know if they're going to be
Yeah,
a
the
top 10.
Lions.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, the Lions also did that a lot, and I thought they had an awesome run scheme. What you see a lot out of the NFL offenses is, if they want to run the other way, they'll just have a guy flying across and they'll give him on a little jet sweep.
Yeah.
But, that's only one wrinkle.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of, motion, I think Kellen Moore does a great job with motion to get numbers advantages in the run game, or to bump a linebacker or safety out of the run fit and then force a nickel into the run fit or a corner into the run fit. And then on top of that, I think Kellen Moore does a great job of forcing corners to be in the run fits. You'll see a lot. You'll see them use a lot of nub formations, which is essentially you have the tight end on one side of the field, and that's it. There's no receiver outside of him. That's going to bring the corner in to have to make him play and fit in the run. Uh, I thought Kellen Moore did a really good job of using those formations to force corners to play in the run fit. Something the Eagles just really didn't do all that often last year. They're pretty static in their formations, and it just wasn't helping them get better matchups. So I do see that coming out of Kellen Moore's offense. I'll touch a little bit more on under center though. So even though he might vary how often he's under center year to year, in general they're more balanced than what the Eagles were. When the Eagles did get under center, like you mentioned, they pretty low numbers. 2021, they were 30th in the league in under center rate at 16.7%. 2022, they were 31st at 11%. 2023, they were just under 7%. They were 32nd in the league. This is they just kind of fell into like this rabbit hole, and they just kept going further and further down into what they thought they were really good at. But every single year they were under center, they were first in run rate, and it just got worse. So they were about 80% runs from under center in 2021. That jumped up to 87% in 2022, and then they're about 92% in 2023. I mean, it just became so predictable. Kellen Moore, on the other hand, he's been about 70% every year. There's one year he was 73% run rate. That might seem like very high, but teams just run when they're under center more often. So they were ninth in 2019, 10th in 2021, 16th in 2022, and 13th in 2023. So you're going to see a lot more diverse action when they are under center. And for the people wondering why I'm not including 2020, I'm not including the years Dak didn't play. I don't want to look at the backup quarterback numbers. So I only have limited time to put all this stuff together. So don't yell at me. But point is, Kellen Moore's just going to bring a more diverse attack. They probably will go under center more often. I don't know if they're going to be, super high in that rate, but when they are under center, they're going to be more diverse in what they do. The type of runs they're going to use, I think that really is dependent on how much they do play under center. You're going to get a lot more outside zone, a lot more duo when you see them under center, and you're going to see a lot more inside zone when they are in shotgun. So we'll have to see how that works out. But to your point of pistol, you can get a lot of the same under center action out of pistol, but then you do get to have that quarterback run game element. So we'll see how that works out. And there's other things that pistol can do and help you with, and especially in the world of RPOs, a lot of times teams, what they're doing is they're shifting their run fits. It's called slinging the run fits. So essentially, they're switching who's in the run fits based on where the running back is in shotgun. So if the running back is to you on your side of the field in shotgun, a lot of times you're out of the run fit now because they're trying to RPO you on that side if you're like the overhang defender or potentially the outside linebacker. And then on the opposite side, you'll have the opposite overhang defenders and the run fits. But in pistol, you don't really know who's gonna be the RPO, the read guy at that point in time. And what teams will have to do then is read the opening of the quarterback. So if the quarterback gets the ball in pistol and turns to his right, well then those where he is looking, those players are now out of the run fits. But that creates more confusion for the defense. That creates more post snap processing for the defense. So there's a lot of good things that pistol can do for you and do to the offense. So those are just a few of the things that Moore will do with his running backs. I did want to touch on one more thing because I know everyone loves to talk about how often they target running backs in the pass game. As a percentage of targets, they're really not that high. It's more so that Kellen Moore has just been more of a pass-heavy approach. And some years, there's been years where they have been a little bit more run-heavy, and then years where they've been more balanced. But as a percentage of targets, if you look at all 4 years in Dallas combined, they were bottom 10th in percentage of targets that went to running backs. But in his 1 year with the Chargers, they're 28th in percentage of targets that went to the running backs. I mean, if you played fantasy, go look at Austin Eckler's receiving targets in 2022 and then see where they're at in 2023. Even including the injury, I mean, it was just a huge drop-off, which I think is a good thing. There's an inverse correlation between how often you target the running back and your offense's success. If you're forced to throw to the running back a lot, usually that is because of other issues for your team, whereas your quarterback can't push the ball down the field or they're not good enough processing to push the ball down the field, or you just don't have good enough weapons to get it to, and then you're kind of forced to throw it to your running back who is getting targeted a lot closer to line of scrimmage. It's just less efficient to throw to your running back a ton. So I hope they don't become a team that's just throwing to their backs a lot. So I'm interested to see how this offense goes. I mean, I don't know if who's going to have the influence. Are they going to be a run heavy team, a balanced team? There could be some, some what's the word? There might be some conflict between Sirianni and Kellen Moore on that, and that does worry me a little bit. But we'll have to see. I don't know. Did you have any thoughts on who might kind of take that over?
Yeah, I don't know if there will be. I think they both like to air it out.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
much
you're actually
so,
right. I think about that.
so much so that I saw repeated instances where, let's call it 25 offensive coordinators would be running almost all the time in certain short yardage situations, and Kellen Moore's regularly throwing 3rd and 1 from midfield, 4th and 1 from the 30, and he's throwing all the time. He likes short passing concepts. Um, it's hard to say how I feel about that because it's like if you are so predictable and run inside, you just run a dive every 3rd and 1 and you get stuffed, it looks terrible. Um,
Well, 3rd and 1,
but
we
then
know
if
what's
you
coming. With this, we
push
won't have to
push,
worry
yeah,
about that. We
that
won't have to worry about
it does
that.
alleviate that concern. Actually,
Yeah.
that's a great point. So yeah, it's just one of those things where every person assumes the run is just a given. I think it goes back to that Seahawks Super Bowl that they blew, where it's like, just give it to Marshawn Lynch. And of course, that was the right thing to do, but it doesn't guarantee success. Uh, so, it's one of those things. And in my article, I will talk about what I think Eagles fans will like about his scheme and what I think they won't. But yeah, I think that bringing up the tush push, that's one of the reasons their under center rate runs was so high. It's because the only time they were under center is they were running tush push. So I hope to see more diverse formations, whether it is pistol under center or various shotgun formations, including quad receivers to one side. And I think we will see that. But it's also a balance because if you're a Super Bowl contender, do you want to just experiment with a bunch of offensive concepts when every win matters so much in the NFL? So I'm glad I'm not the one responsible for that, but I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out.
Yeah, and I think you actually do make a good point about Sirianni wants to be a guy that airs it out. I mean, do you remember when he was calling plays the first half of the 2021 season? Like they were acting like that was Peyton Manning back there. And listen, I love Jalen, but what he brings is his legs are what kind of equalizes everything. And especially in 2021, he was still growing as a passer. They kind of threw him out there like he was this air raid quarterback. And we're a team that was built to run the ball. And I don't know what the hell was happening at that point in time. So maybe that more, I think people think Moore is a super pass heavy coordinator. He's not super pass heavy. He's more balanced than anything. But there have been some years like 2022, they had a higher run pass ratio than the Eagles did. I think they were 7th and 8th in the league. So there have been years where he will run the ball a little bit more. So it really just depends year to year, which I do like that about Moore, that he's not just set in his ways that he is going to do this one thing. I think he is a guy that is willing to grow. And try different things. But when you do try different things, sometimes you end up with that Zeke Elliott play where he's under center and he gets demolished into the quarterback, and you get some of those plays. I do think he gets a little bit too much hate for that play because it was like one of those. It was like 2 seconds left on the clock. You got to go 80 yards down the field. You got a 0.01% chance of success in that situation anyway. So I do like that he tried something different. Obviously, the results didn't work out, but
One
so
thing I would say is people have talked about, we went from two coordinators with 0 years of coordinator experience to now Fangio, who's got as much experience as anyone, and Kellen Moore. Here's the thing. Kellen Moore was born in like 1988. This is a young guy. He's had 5 seasons as an offensive coordinator. In my book, that's still pretty fresh. Um, So to me, he still has room to grow, which is great. He's known to be someone who is fanatical about studying concepts. If I come out in this formation, what are the 10 different ways I can play off this to conflict the defense, so on and so forth. So I don't think his growth is finished. If you ask Cowboys fans and Chargers fans, he had his warts, and I wouldn't say that he's stuck with those warts, just as any young player. I think the same applies for coaches. And now he has a team where, whether it's from the line to the receivers, tight end group, and the running back, there's no limitations about what you can do. And the beauty of that is it really opens up the playbook. And he's someone who's known to study kind of like the meta defense, because it's kind of every year or two the defensive trend starts to swing towards certain popular concepts. Most notably, recently, a lot of simulated pressure looks and combination zone coverages. And if you have a whole off season to study that stuff, come out swinging in the first several weeks, you can have a potent offense. Now, the defenses also come with their tricks up their sleeve. That's one of the beauties of football in general. It's a big chess match. The good news is I wouldn't call Kellen Moore a grandmaster, but he's right below that level. He's an international master when it comes to offensive coordinator, but he's young. So he still has room to grow. I put him firmly as a top 10 offensive coordinator, and you're coming from a group who was amongst the worst at it last year. So that's very encouraging.
Yeah, and listen, I had never watched really Eckler in depth. Like you see the highlight plays and whatnot, and you watch him on Red Zone and stuff. But I never really spent the time to watch Eckler all that often. Man, he is definitely a receiving back. I don't think he's a great runner. I don't think his vision is great. He was obviously dealing with an ankle issue last year, but I think there's a reason why now Eckler is going on Twitter and talking about how uh, the Chargers wanted him to carry the ball 300 times the next year, and he's like, "Well, that's not the kind of back I am." I think there's a reason why the run game didn't work last year or the year before Kellen Moore came in. It is a little funny to see a running back say, "Hey, I'm actually not a guy that runs the ball." So, and their offensive line, dude, it was hard to watch. It was hard to watch that offense. I do want to say I do wonder how much Stout is going to play into their run game and their schemes and their designs, because he has a ton of influence. They've had some really good run designs and some good plays. How much of that is going to get thrown out, or how much of that is going to get meshed into the offense? How much does Stout have to say? Listen, we're not going to know. There's no answer to that unless you're in that room. But I do. It'll be interesting to see how all of this kind of comes together, because you got Sirianni, who has he's an offense coordinator, has his own ideas. You got Moore, who's an offense coordinator, has his own ideas, and then you got Stout, who's been doing it longer than both of them combined. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, just quick on that. I I will say I don't think that Moore is a great innovator in the run game. I think he's way more innovative in the pass game. So if it were me, I'd give the keys to Stout. Now here's the trick. It has to be within the context of the formations that Moore likes to run, which are exotic. So if the Eagles came out last year in a ton of these like 11 personnel, shotgun, spread out the field, and then running constant inside zone. It's like I don't care how good Stout is. Yeah, you can coach the guys to like block better, but it's like there's nothing to it. It's so vanilla. And even though their average run was solid, they had hardly any explosive runs because the potential for an inside run like that, it's very limited. Rarely are you going to break big ones. Um, when you start to get into more of the under center runs, outside zone, same side toss, ones out of motion with a lot of motion added, now your chances of explosive runs go way up. And then you also have Barkley to keep the chains moving. I think he's someone where if he's not touched till he's 2 yards down the field, which is a big difference from what was happening with the Giants, where he's frequently getting hit behind the line of scrimmage over half the time, according to the stats. That's gonna entice him, or I guess that's gonna influence him to be more of a north-south runner, which is conducive to his skill set. And I think the run game could be more potent. One of the criticisms against Moore is that even when they're leading, he'll get away from the run. So I hope there's enough coaches who can make sure that there's some level of balance. It's one of these chicken or the egg discussions that it'll never be solved, where it's like, passing is better than running by the stats, but you can't abandon the run because then the defense can just drop 8 all the time. But play action is just as effective whether you have a good run game or not. So, you can find stats to support whatever your preconceived notion is of what's correct. In my view, a balanced approach that is sculpted around the players, your best players, is what you want to do. Just to be concrete about that, I think the Eagles should be running to the left fairly often on wide zones. I mean, Mailata and Dickerson, throw Goddard out there. You have a wrecking crew. So, that's the kind of stuff I hope to see, just in terms of the run game.
Yeah. And the good thing about Stout is that he has now coached with Chip Kelly, Doug Peterson, and Nick Sirianni, all different coaches, all different schemes, and he's been able to have good run offenses with them. So I'm not too concerned on that. And I think it's a melding of, Stout's really good at the run game and designing that end of it, and then you got Kellen Moore, who's really good at getting the passing game going and being super creative on that end. I think it all works together very well. And thinking about some runs, or just a couple of concepts, when they do go under center, I think this might be a reason they go under center more often. I think duo is going to be Saquon's best run concept, but that's a play that you primarily are running out of. It's run best out of under center. So we'll have to see how that kind of plays out with, trying to add that in while also making sure we're using Jalen's legs to help give you advantages and number counts in the box. So we'll see how that plays out. Now,
Can you just tell the audience real quick what duo is?
duo, it's essentially like a gap scheme run. It is a gap scheme run. It's essentially like power, where you're getting double teams at the point of attack. You just don't have a pulling guard to come around. Essentially, you're getting double teams to work up to the linebacker. You're trying to create a lot of vertical displacement off the line of scrimmage. And the reason why I like Saquon and this the most is because it really makes the read a lot easier for the running back. And of all the things Saquon's really good at, his vision isn't something that I'd put out there as one of his best skill sets. So it really makes things a little bit easier for him, which will allow him to play more confidently. And the great thing about duo is that it's really designed to bounce out to the corner. So I think I'm going to go through and put a video breakdown of these duo runs, just so people can kind of see what it's designed to do. But a lot of times what's happening is you're getting your running back on a corner. So I'm really excited to see how that works out, and how it all melds together with Jalen in the run game as well. But I think we've gotten a little long here, so we just want to finish this off a little bit and look at the long-term view of the unit. I mean, if you look at Saquon's contract, he's probably done after his second year. He could play after the third year. Typically not how Howie, handles these contracts. Usually it's there's an out after in the last year of the contract, and he'll be a little bit older at that time. So either Howie will extend the player by that time, or he's gonna try and move him, or whether it's a trade or a cut. And at that point in time, Saquon will be very near 30 years old. So we'll have to see how that happens. But what are your thoughts on this of this unit long term?
Yeah, I think they'll look for a new feature back after 2 years. Um, they got Swift for peanuts, but he was known to be a pretty solid player. He just had not got a lot of reps with the Lions, because he was mostly known to be more of like a receiving type back.
Yeah.
Ironically, the Eagles didn't use him like that.
Injuries too.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I don't think the 2026 starter is on the roster right now. And even if Saquon, let's call it, in 2025 has 2,000 scrimmage yards, I still don't think he plays that third year just because of the money. And by that time, you're coming up against 30, which that's pretty much the point of no return for running backs. Frank Gore's the only guy in recent memory I think that's overcome that. So, you know, I think for these 2 years it's going to be a great run. I'm here to enjoy it, and yeah, maybe we'll draft like in a year or two. Maybe we'll draft someone like as a third rounder or something, or maybe we'll pay up again.
I do think that this upcoming running back class next year is supposed to be extremely loaded. So why not get out a year ahead of it? And especially the Eagles like to get out a year ahead of their players. So they don't like to have rookies starting, especially being the bell cow back. So why not get ahead of it and look towards running back next year? I know they did just draft Will Shipley. We'll see how he develops. I do think he needs to add some play strength, and we'll see where it goes from there. I think his vision really can carry him into being a guy that you can uh, that will have him be a solid back and a guy that's going to play 5-6 years in the league. But I don't know if he's a guy that's going to be he's going to be to me more of a committee rotation back. We'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if they go and draft a running back next year, knowing that Saquon is probably on his. It's probably only going to be here 2 years, so we'll see. But and like you said, until then, it should be extremely exciting. You drop Saquon into this offense, and man, it's going to be explosive. And I already know people are going to be getting tired of seeing the Eagles come up when they play their online matches of Madden. So we'll see how this year goes. I think it's going to be fun though. So hopefully you guys like this pod. We're gonna continue on our offensive series, and keep trucking along until training camp comes up. So, Eric, unless you have anything else, are you good?
Yeah, we did a rookie review with on Shane Haff on the Shane page or Pin and Pull podcast. I'd invite everyone to check that out. They released it kind of as like a 4-part series. I thought it was really good football talk that we really like those guys over there. So if you're looking for more content, check it out.
Yeah, I'll link that in the description. But until next time, go Birds.